I think this has been an extraordinary and very vibrant day. Having been part of the early planning, it's especially, gratifying to see it happen and to see the Nichols Prize becoming not just a way of honoring the great achievement of the individual laureates, but as a way of continuing to push forward on building a legacy and associating the J.C. Nichols name with asking important questions, really, and trying to find new answers to key urban problems. The first question is sort of where do we go from here, and I'm very hopeful that we can, or that ULI will want to envision the Nichols Forum as an ongoing event, as the Nichols Prize is an ongoing event, so should the Forum. There have been so many new ideas and issues put on the table today that it's been, if there's any frustration for me in today, it's that it's been impossible to dive deeply enough into any one of them. So I'm hoping, one thought may be that in the future we can have Nichols Forums that are devoted fully to one of these specific issues in depth. Of those, probably the most important is the issue of inequality and inclusion, which has been a theme that has come up in the context of all three panels today, and almost every participant in every panel has spoken on some aspect of it, and indeed it came up just in the last couple of minutes. It ties together all of the issues we've had in front of us today. I'm also struck by the fact that what we might call pure issues of urban design, physical design, have been less at the forefront, which I take to mean not that that stuff doesn't matter, but that we've raised the bar sufficiently so that we now take a certain level of design sophistication for granted. And the values of urbanism, of the values of the street, of density, of walkability, what Joe Riley this morning called the natural, joyful experience of the public realm, wonderful phrase. Those are all widely shared, and I think we no longer feel we have to actually try to sell them, certainly not at least within a group like this. The challenge of gentrification remains also very much, that's the cousin to the issue of inequality and affordability, and that only seems to become more and more of a problem as we face some cities face not just gentrification but hyper-gentrification. I was amazed to read a piece about a neighborhood in London recently in which stores and local businesses were closing, not because they were driven out by high rents, although the rents were high, but because nobody was there to patronize them, because almost all the houses were owned by Russian oligarchs or Middle Eastern gazillionaires or what have you, and the neighborhood was essentially a ghost neighborhood. And so there was no need for a dry cleaner and a shop selling this and a shop selling that. And so the neighborhood became, in fact, not a place of life, but as dead an urban neighborhood as a poor neighborhood might have been, if not even more so. This is not the gravest problem we face, and it's certainly not a problem faced by that many cities, but in fact it is a problem faced by many of them, or portions of many of them, because it connects to the fact that the city isn't economically necessary in the same way it once was. the city prospers because we want it to prosper, because people want to be in it, which, if you think about where American cities were in the 1960s and 70s, is a phenomenal and wonderful and glorious thing. But there is no free lunch, and that also brings with it a whole new set of challenges that we're only beginning to know how to grapple with. Finally, when in the conversation just now about technology, it occurred to me that really the physical city kind of is the original internet. It is a series of hyperlinks in real space. It is a construction created to maximize the number of encounters that can exist between people to productive and creative synergies and new values, which is in fact kind of what the internet does. The city does it in real physical space. And we've also learned through the experience of the last generation, when the demise of the city, when the internet was expected to create the demise of the city, and it has in fact done exactly the opposite. It has in many ways helped us usher in a very strong urban age, that we want to be in cities, even if we do not have to be in cities in the way that once we did. Now, a market can exist online, but other kinds of relationships cannot exist online. And we're just now learning how to adapt to all of that. A lot of it really also comes down to short-term versus long-term thinking. The most important things that were said today were about the long term. And I think at the end of the day, the city is about the long term, not the short term. And we've reaffirmed that, I think, in everything that's been said. Now, let me offer the podium to somebody who can speak with an authority that I do not have, because he is a native of Kansas City and has been living the experience of this city most of his life, Jonathan Kemper, who I always thought of as the ultimate proof that there are such things as enlightened bankers.
Well, I'll take that as a compliment. I was making a mental note to myself, never follow Paul Goldberger in speaking with his silver-tongued oratory. First, my takeaway from this entire presentation is the value of ULI as a convener and its mission and the pride that we have in the Nichols connection to ULI and to this prize. Also, the attitude of this group, universal, which, contrasting with the dialogue going on in the national politics, is optimistic. I mean, this is all about what we can do, especially if we work together. And I think that's, as Paul was saying, in the nature of cities and people working together. A piece of shameless promotion. This wasn't out when you walked in, but you may have seen it at lunchtime. This is a walking tour guide that we just recently produced in connection with the Historic Kansas City Foundation, which is the local preservation organization. It talks about the Country Club Plaza in a planning context. And I thought I might just touch on very briefly some of the morals of the J.C. Nichols story that we've tried to bring out in the walking guide and in his writings. My favorite piece is called Planning for Permanence. Maybe you all know it. All of his speeches are online, and they're kept in the State Historical Society here. Wonderful stuff. But it was mentioned several times what an important figure he was in the history of urban planning in the United States. One of the morals is that quality sells, and that it's interesting because we've been having kind of I'm not sure the word is battle as much as a conversation as to what the plaza is and what should be kept and what needs to change. And his term of planning for permanence did not mean you don't change things. It was all about the planning part of that, and the permanence was really more about property values, so the people who were part of it knew who their neighbors would be and what would be coming next. So it's been a very interesting experience as we've gone through a new planning process for the Country Club Plaza. The first thing that happened after the plan was passed by the City Council was developers came in and said, well, of course you'll make an exception for me. So far the City Council has said, actually a plan needs to have some structure that people can count on, and I hope there's more of that as it continues. Now, from the business perspective, when we were talking, Patrick, when I said, well, what does it mean to be an 18-hour city? And he said, well, the 24-hour city is one, and I'd remembered this from a friend of mine who did real estate for General Electric. The 24-hour port city was the one that and you were doing an investment portfolio for a large institutional investor, and it turns out that that's pretty much fully bought and highly valued. And the 18-hour city is the next tier, and so it's trying to make that some sort of case for that value. And the issue really is, how do you provide the people some sense as to what the underlying value of those communities are? I think the conversation we had here was absolutely right. Stick to your DNA, but think about possibilities. Our biggest advantage is not only scale and manageability, it is that nimbleness. But I think that if you do stick to some sense of structure and planning, you have a huge advantage, especially over those people who don't have the luxury of options. There's also this issue that when you have people who come together to plan, and I loved all the discussion about that. We went through an exercise about 4 years ago, it's probably 5 years ago now, with the Chamber of Commerce, choosing the big 5 things we wanted to do, and among the options were included to be the barbecue capital of the world and the world's healthiest city. And any group that could come together and hold those 2 things in their head at the same time was very impressive. And so that's the Kansas City thing. We're small enough to know each other and big enough to be thinking.
The only city where people have barbecue while they run in the park. Right.
Right. Yeah. Just in a quick closing on what I thought were some of the most interesting points that were brought in. One is just the question that was asked of the mayors: if you had $50 billion for Houston, what would you do? And oftentimes people use money as the excuse to not do anything, not to be thinking forward. And yet we do know that there are huge infrastructure needs, and the point of being made about doing it smart, making it connected, putting the incentives in there to try to be more inclusionary, and I hope more ecological is key. This whole idea of the magic bullet versus DNA, will you find the auto plant that moves to town? It's really all about talent, especially young talent, especially retaining that you have and the people who want to be here. And this question about state relations. We spend way too much time in our community worrying about those guys who don't really worry about us. It's a strange thing. We are the economic engine, Kansas City and St. Louis, that drives the state, and both states, Kansas and Missouri, and yet we don't have the clout that we need to push an urban and metropolitan agenda. And this whole question, which I had never thought about before, about autonomous vehicles, which we know are going to change things, but that they could change things for the worse. That they, if you do have more vehicles traveled inside of a dense area, hadn't thought about that before, but really it is. And so, trying to be intentional about that. And Peter Calthorpe, so the question between the 2 Peters as to, does it matter who the client is? Does it matter whether it's public or private? Right. Or isn't it just all about the client? I really do believe that all this planning stuff is really an expression of systems and values, and you got to get the values right. And Paul, as I was mentioning, as we just got started before, to my mind, it's all about the Chinese saying about a community is healthy when old men plant trees, the shade of which they'll never enjoy. That is true. You have to love this community as a community and not just look at what they're paying you to be here. I think it attracts the wrong kind of people and ends up with very short-term thinking.
Right, and as I said a moment ago, at the end of the day, it really does come down to long-term versus short-term, which is what that statement is. I think there's another thing that I take away from this too, which is a very realistic acknowledgement that, kind of there's no free lunch, so to speak. Or, as I like to sometimes say, in every solution there is a new problem. And so, for example, the internet, which is an extraordinary change for the better of civilization, nevertheless does not come free, and even when accessibility is possible for everyone, as Ellen pointed out in that question in the last seminar, there are challenges and problems that come along with it that have to be met. Because we have the paradox today of people being more connected than ever before, and yet more factionalized than ever before. Because I think one thing the internet does is remove as much of a direct connection to place as there once was. Because when you communicate with somebody online, you could be anywhere, they could be anywhere. It's exactly the same as when you pick up your phone and call somebody. Unlike the old days of landlines, we can call them that, if I take this phone out of my pocket and call somebody a block away in Kansas City, or I call somebody in California, to the phone, it's exactly the same thing. Distance and place mean less today, which offers some extraordinary opportunities for other kinds of connections, but it also reshifts things and makes them much less physical place dependent. And for those of us who are invested in the physical city, and for whom it has great meaning, and who believe, as all of us do, that it continues to have great meaning to civilization, even as it is not necessary in quite the same way it used to be, that's a new challenge and problem that we need to meet and work on.
And I think we could probably close on that. I do want to mention something that said, with that technology and the decline of the metropolitan newspapers, the idea of a metropolitan consciousness and an agenda is going to be a challenge. I think that, as you say, there's opportunities in that. I hope that public broadcasting, especially public radio, the libraries, others come into that realm. But you need to have a conversation where everyone has access,
right,
and buy-in, or else you don't have the trust that's so important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Good.
Great. Well, thank you, gentlemen, so much for a cogent summary. We really appreciate it. I just want to make a couple of notes here at the end. We at ULI found this discussion incredibly helpful as we continue to frame our program of work and deliver our mission across all of our networks. If you've been around ULI for a while, this was not an unusual experience, having a great, stimulating conversation with terrific speakers and a wonderful facility and this great weather. But it's not unique. We do about 1,000, 1,200 events like this a year. I checked the calendar online a while ago, and we've got events today in Warsaw, Austin, Melbourne, New York City, Miami, and Beijing, among other places, including Kansas City. And we're a membership organization, and many of you I know are members and leaders of ULI. If this kind of thing intrigues you, if you want to get involved, I urge you to look at membership. If you're already a member, thank you, but please consider joining. We are really nothing more than the collective experience and wisdom of our members, and we need yours as well. I would personally like to thank Paul and Jonathan and all of our speakers and moderators today, all the staff who were involved with creating and running the show here at the museum. A wonderful job by all of our team, and all of the audience for hanging in there, for participating, for being engaged with us. We really appreciate it. There is another event, believe it or not, happening at 4:30 at the Kemper, where we will take this conversation forward with a group of ULI Kansas City members. We operate a district council, as we call it, here in Kansas City, with a great group of engaged members, and we'll begin to localize some of the conversation that we had today. So again, a round of applause for all of you. Thank you. And a final thanks to the Nichols family, and I'm going to invite Wayne to make one final comment.
I want to thank you all for sticking this out, and I would like to mention that there's a part of the Nichols family that has not been given the proper recommendation and attention over the past few days. My uncle Miller Nichols, who took over the Nichols Company from my grandfather when he died in 1950, responsible for preserving it, moving it forward, and making the company really what it is today. And I also want to thank all of you for being here, as well as the wonderful ULI staff that has worked for 3 years to make this event happen. And we appreciate it, and we loved having you,